My name is FitzGerald. I work as a senior engineering architect in the Azure Data Engineering Group in a program called Data Migration Jumpstart, which I'll explain a little bit later, exactly what it does and exactly what the benefit of that program is.
Hi, I'm Jay. I'm also part of the same team. Been in my migration scenario for a while, doing migrations, performance tuning, consolidations, etc. So today, let's learn a little bit of database migration, right? Back to Jay.
Yeah, hopefully that's why everyone's here, right? Otherwise, you might want to leave. Yeah, these are the normal slides. I don't think we need to go over this any longer. What I would say just about PASS is that it's an amazing organization. From an engineering perspective, it's something we're very proud to support. I've been a member of PASS since, 2000. So, I mean, it offers an awful lot for the community, and we're very thankful to be here today to have our session. Like Jay mentioned, like I mentioned, we're members of the Azure Data Product Engineering Group. We look after complex migration scenarios for Microsoft around SQL modernization, as well as other heterogeneous modernization stories. So other platforms that you might have come across, like Oracle, DB2, mainframe even migrations, that's what our team looks after and drives within the engineering group. But today we're going to be primarily focused on homogeneous migrations from SQL Server to Azure SQL, as we call it now, the full suite of products we have around Azure SQL, whether that's managed instance, single database, and so forth, Hyperscale. So for an agenda, we're going to talk about some of the key migration drivers and blockers that we see in the field around migration scenarios. We're going to talk about how we approach generally migration engagements with all of you, our customers. We'll talk about the data migration program at Microsoft, what we offer, because sometimes the tooling can be a bit daunting. There's a lot of tooling there to help you, a lot of accelerators that we offer, and it can be a little bit daunting from time to time to understand all of those. So later on, we're going to have a demo from Jay around that. So we'll talk about as well our program within Microsoft so you get an understanding of what it is. Then the tools and custom IPs that we have for aiding those migrations, like I mentioned before, all of the accelerators that we have there, as well as some demos. And then we'll go into case study and observations from the field, from these kind of large-scale migrations that we're driving. If there are questions at any stage, please feel free to interrupt me. I'm also trying to make the tempo of my voice or how I'm talking slower as well. I'm coming from Ireland. It's a bit difficult from time to time. So, and then we'll go into a summary at the end. So let's first discuss some of the key migration drivers and blockers that we see in typical engagements. So I'll get everyone awake for 1 second. Who hasn't seen this slide at some point in their lives, or who in their organization has SQL Server 2008 or 2008 or 2 still hanging about? Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's quite a lot, right? So one of the, if not the largest, especially in the SQL Server modernization area and migration area that we see as a key driver at the moment is end of support for SQL Server 2008, for SQL Server 2008 or 2, as well as very shortly for Windows Server, because those people that have been maybe hanging back a little bit with the SQL Server side of things are now going to have the double whammy of also having the operating system go out of support. This is also something that we're seeing a lot of our customers engage with us on, come to us and ask for advice and assistance in migrating away from these legacy systems. So I think, as everybody knows, the major impact of that is no longer can you receive security updates by default. We do offer an additional licensing model in order for you to continue for 3 years on a year-by-year basis to get that extended security update offer from us, ESU, it's called. But in general terms, that's kicking the kind of tire down the road a little bit. And in a couple of years, you're going to be faced with the same problem. So we generally work with our customers very, very closely to remove that exposure in their data estate. Compliance concerns as well, we'll come to some of those in a bit, and missed innovation opportunities. So what are your options if you're in the end of support bucket, that you have these outlying SQL Server instances running SQL Server 2008, 2008 or 2? Well, primarily, we give you two options, either to modernize to Azure or modernize on-premises. We're not going to concentrate very much in this talk today about modernizing on-premises. It's not the topic of our discussion today. We're more focused on the modernizing to Azure portion. And there we have basically two options, either to lift and shift to PaaS solutions like managed instance for the lowest friction, or away and onto SQL VM, so infrastructure as a service. Both of those options, if you follow those, will give you the ability to continue to have support on those older versions at no extra charge for 3 years. But again, generally what we would recommend is, this is not the recommended way to go. We would recommend that we start to look at actually modernizing the SQL Server version that you're using, not just prolonging the inevitability for another 3 years and then having this discussion and this session probably at PaaS in 2.5 years' time again, or 3 years' time, whatever. So what do we generally see as, again, these key drivers when it's not just around the end of support? So compliance is a very, very big driver at many, many of our customers. Not only compliance in terms of the security updates that I've been mentioning earlier, but also from an ISV perspective, there's a lot of applications out there that for whatever reason are also driving, as well as stalling and blocking, driving migrations as well, older versions of specific software products that are mandating the upgrades of the databases in the back end, as well as, of course, we can turn that completely around and see a lot of ISVs out there that for whatever reason, which we'll come to a couple of these reasons in the coming points, are blocking the migration as well away from SQL Server 2008 or 2008 or 2. Either the ISV doesn't exist any longer, or someone installed the product but doesn't even understand anymore who and why and what it even does. These kind of things are some of the scenarios that we equally see. So other key drivers, scale. So the ability to scale with these new solutions, new platform solutions, is something that's definitely driving innovation at customers. It's definitely something that we're seeing when we're going out there talking to all of you, is that absolutely we want, or the DBAs that we talk to, they definitely want to use the scalability functionality within all of our platform services, Azure SQL, and also additional business functionality that comes along with the innovations that have come in the meantime since 2008 and 2008 or 2, for instance, or even in the last release, even from 2016 migrations to Azure SQL Database, and some of the functionality that's come along really helps. HADR, so Anna brought this up, I think, in one of her sessions with Bob Ward around the HADR functionality being so easy to implement, or comparatively easier to implement in the cloud than it is on premises. That's something that we also see from a business perspective and from a DBA perspective, an administrative perspective, being a key driver for a lot of the engagements that we're currently running with our customers. And cost reduction, of course, always comes up, the ability to reduce costs in terms of overall hosting and operational costs. New markets as well, so new business-to-business or business-to-customer markets. All of these are real key drivers that we're seeing day-to-day in the engagements that we're driving as being major, major drivers behind modernization of SQL Server. Now, that was all nice and good, lots of nice key drivers. What we also, though, see are equally, on the other side, lots and lots of not-so-nice blockers, stopping innovation, stopping modernization. But we have some answers for those. So, generally, if you look at the bottom left, feature parity and compatibility, I believe everybody here in the audience understands how much of a blocker that can be in modernization, especially of SQL Server. We come across that quite a lot, especially on the compatibility side, so application side mostly. My application doesn't support Azure SQL Database or Azure SQL Database Managed Instance. My database only supports version XYZ of SQL Server. I can't, or I'm not able to modernize or to migrate. So to cover that, We have a very compelling story around compatibility certification. I'd recommend anybody who doesn't know that term goes out and looks at it on our website on the Microsoft docs.microsoft.com. So you can find the information around SQL Server compatibility certification. This is an idea from us and being backed by the SQL engineering group, where we are focused on guaranteeing functionality of application at a compatibility level, no longer at a version, and wanting our ISVs, our SIs and the like, to certify against a compatibility level and no longer against a version, which unblocks. We guarantee from Microsoft that your application will continue working the way it has if you leave it at compatibility level, let's say 100. Yeah, so for SQL Server 2008 or 2, even if you migrate to Azure SQL Database MI, for example. So it's a commitment we've taken on our side to drive the engineering behind that, to ensure that that's the case, and we are very confident in that, and confident that that's a way for unblocking some of these legacy issues that have forced us in the past to either postpone or even cancel certain migrations. So which migration path to choose is another excellent one. That's something that we see as a blocker. Everyone loves choice, but sometimes there can be too much choice. And sometimes it can be also very difficult, not only once you've made the choice of where's my target and where am I going to go to, but also how am I going to get there? What am I going to do to basically get there? What are my steps? What are the steps that I need to take to ensure that I have a successful migration off my current version of SQL Server on premises when I move to Azure SQL? So we also have very many accelerators, both internally in our team that we've developed. Jay will be talking about those in a bit, as well as the wider tools that come out of our engineering team as well, which Jay will also be talking about. I'll touch on them in a little bit. But what we've tried to do is to basically make that decision and make that step-by-step guidance easier for you as a customer. So easier for you to move and easier for you to migrate, easier for you eventually to get away from legacy versions of SQL Server onto modernized versions of SQL Server in the cloud. So those are those three. Then also blockers. We've talked a little bit about application dependencies. This is something that is also that we do see, though, an awful lot as a blocker around dependencies of applications on specific things or specific connectivity factors or specific functionality factors that maybe have not the same way of functioning within platform services they have on premises. So this is something as well where, again, the IPs that we've developed within our team, the various accelerators that we've developed can also unblock these potential application dependency issues that may cause you some headache in the migration. And we'll come back to those in a bit. And we've been talking about the migration accelerators that can help you. We're going to come to that as well in a little bit. Complex functionality. So that's things like my application is utilizing DTC, for instance. Who here has applications that utilize DTC and has seen that as being a blocker, for instance, for migration to Azure SQL up to this point, right? Or if you have dependencies on linked servers to heterogeneous sources from SQL Server, like you've got Oracle linked servers. How do I handle that? What am I going to do there? How can I migrate this database with all of these external dependencies into Azure SQL Database or into Azure SQL Database MI, for instance? So these are things that we come across quite a lot. And again, these are things that we in our team have built up a lot of knowledge around, how to get around these issues, how to mitigate these issues, and how to re-architect some of these issues that you just can't get around, and what the ways to do that are. And then finally as well here, the two at the top, data migration factors. So that's to do with the size of data operations. So in the past, the limitations pre-hyperscale, for instance, of over 4 terabytes being an absolute blocker, or meaning that you have to move to infrastructure as a service. Some of these things as well. Data movement as well. How do I get that volume of data just from on-premises over into the cloud? I mean, we have options there. We have very fast network links that we can help you set up, but nonetheless, there's a theoretical maximum, right? And these things at multiple terabyte sizes can be a challenge. So there too, we've been building up solutions around various things like data box. It's one possibility to move very high volumes of data into our data center, stuff like this, which we are constantly evolving and working on integrating in our tools as well, so that it makes that kind of data size operation of data size issues a thing of the past. Authentication factors. So this is a big one with Windows authentication, right? And Azure Active Directory and migrations that utilize applications that use those authentication methods or Windows authentication. So this is as well somewhere that we've been working in the tools and made some updates to our tools over the last couple of releases to also facilitate the migration of such groups and users across into Azure Active Directory, given that there's a federated service between the two, between your Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, the ability to be able to facilitate that. We also have custom IP that we built up predating that can also help. And again, Jay will be talking about that a little bit more and discussing a little bit more about the options there. And finally, backup retention and security as well. These are some of another one of the blockers. Prior to us being able to offer long-term backup retention, this was one other issue where we had to come up with some intelligent solutions in order to facilitate regulatory reasons for having backups longer than the default 35 days in order for us now to be able to support up to 10 years of backup within Azure SQL Database. So this is more historical, but nonetheless, in certain target decisions, it also has a role to play. In fact, it's being videoed, the session today, but I'll be careful that I don't blurt out customer names. So working together with one very large European customer a couple of weeks ago, this was one of the major issues that they had. One of the major blockers that they had was around, even though they are utilizing Azure SQL Database, and they have the possibility to have long-term backup retention over 10 years of period. They have only a cadence of minimum of weekly. And the problem is that they have multiple databases that they needed to have synchronization of backup. So they needed to make sure that each one of those databases was backed up on a Monday, not database 1 Monday, database 2 Tuesday, maybe database 3 Wednesday, within the weekly cadence, but a problem still for them nonetheless. So these are things that we've come across in the past and that we've worked together with customers on solving ways to alleviate those issues. So back to the migration approach. In general, we see 4 cloud path migration approaches. The first of those being rehost, which is traditional lift and shift. Very, very, in terms of effort, the easiest, by far, the easiest migration approach. I take what I have, I move it across to Azure, mostly in an infrastructure as a service basis. I don't have to make any real changes. Everything just works as intended. Even my Windows authentication isn't an issue. There's no real requirement there as well. Then we move to refactor, which is I want to take advantage perhaps of the platform services with really very low code changes. That's generally where we see MI migrations as well as like Azure SQL Database, although that's more going towards re-architect, which is a bit more effort because we have more things to consider, more things to be concerned around to make sure that we're making the right decisions. And we do need to make some changes to our application in those migrations, as well as rebuild when I'm starting from afresh. And I want to basically build from my application from scratch to take advantage not only at the database level of all of the functionality and all of the feature sets that I have, but also at the application level as well. So instead of using traditional web services, for instance, to use platform service within Azure, like web services actually within Azure, that can allow me to have the scalability at that level as well. Or containerization, it's being discussed an awful lot. We were just at the back of the room before with the reporting services guys talking about containerization as well. So this slide is a very interesting slide. This is generally what we see. This is like real from the field, real life example that we generally use as a good indicator of effort. for a migration. And it's what we've gathered over the last 2.5 years of our program, as well as working very closely with global system integrators that we work extremely closely with. This is a general example migration project plan in terms of effort and involvement. I hope everybody can see it. The slides will be available anyway. When we're done, we're uploading the latest version. So in general terms, we see here, if you can read it, what we generally see is the two main areas of effort are around remediating the application. We've talked about that, right? I mean, the chances are that at the application level, there is going to be something that needs to be looked at, that needs to be perhaps even changed, optimized, taking the chance with migration as well to look at the application level, and application layer rather, and also testing, both functional and user testing. So functional and user testing is, of course, a very heavy portion of any migration project. And it's generally where we see an awful lot of effort that has to be basically that has to be given to the migration as a whole, to the project as a whole, is within the testing area. So envision and assess is also an interesting area. We offer tooling that can help you there. We're not going to be discussing that too much today because we're more looking at the actual migration side of things. But assessing your environment, I'm sure everybody in the room here understands and knows it all too well, that in your own data estates, there can be what's become commonly known as SQL Server sprawl, lots of instances of SQL Server that perhaps even sitting here today you're not aware of. You don't know that those SQL servers are there. You don't know the instances are installed. So around finding and assessing and basically discovering those instances, that's something as well that generally takes up a portion of the time of a migration project, really going into the migration, discovering what you have in your estate and discovering what the status of those instances are. So for those three, for the first three, for envisioning and assessing, for converting and migrating, we have tools and services, both first-party and third-party tools, that can really help there. Internally, within our group, within our engineering team, we look after and are part of the engineering team that drives some of those first-party tools that we'll be talking about in more detail a little bit later on. So things like the Database Migration Assistant, for those of you that have used that, our Database Migration Service for the actual migration as well of the database from on-premises into Azure SQL. And then we also offer engineering-driven programs that can cover, well, from points 1 to 9, and actually, in many cases, also knowledge transfer. And in our case, as a DM Jumpstart team, also support post-production. So actually, points 10 and 11 here as well. So these programs are, you might have heard some of them before. Data Migration Jumpstart is the team we're driving. There's also the Fast Track team out of engineering as well as the Azure Migrate program, which is a new initiative since this summer that was announced in the summertime. That can help you as well with your migrations, that can offer you support, and that can basically white glove you as well as give you some other areas of support for these migration projects. So data migration at Microsoft, how does that look? The data migration investments that we've made as a team have been very, very many. We see data migration as extremely important, of course, within the Azure story. Getting your data across into Azure, helping you to achieve that as easily as possible is something that is very, very close to our hearts and something that we want to make as seamless and easy and frictionless and problem-less as possible. So there we've built up lots of these tools. We'll see them from Jay in more detail very shortly to help you with those. But here we also love acronyms at Microsoft. So DMA, which we talked about before, the Database Migration Assistant, DEA, which is the Database Experimentation Assistant, and DMS, which is our Database Migration Service. So these are some of the tools that we've built up and are engineering in order to facilitate the points that I mentioned earlier, making your migrations easier. Engineering-led programs, DM Jumpstart, I'm going to talk about that one a bit more detail because that's our program. Fast Track and Azure Migrate programs, as I've mentioned before. And finally, we have a very comprehensive site called datamigration.microsoft.com that can really help you in all steps of your migration, get an understanding of what these tools are again. Custom IP that we've built up is all maintained on that site. It's a very detailed site. It's a site that we curate. We look after that site. And we also are, most of the IP that is on there, that is our driven IP from our community, like our IP that we've built up to help you, is also community contributed. So we have an open GitHub philosophy as well, with the possibility for you to contribute to that IP as well. If you notice problems, if you have optimization potential for some of those tools and IPs, then you can feed back into this initiative from Microsoft as well. Finally, just before I hand over to Jay, I just want to talk very quickly about the DM Jumpstart program. So our program is a Microsoft Data Group sponsored program that can help you in your complex migrations. We can help you from an engineering perspective with your complex database migration scenarios at your companies. We're completely open to multiple source systems. Today we're talking more about SQL Server, but as I mentioned right at the beginning of the talk, we spend a lot of time as well on heterogeneous modernization, so away from Oracle, DB2, both UDB as well as ZOS mainframe, various other migration, Teradata, for instance, as well as a number of other source systems that we can support with your migration needs. In order to reach out to us, you've got to go to your Microsoft account teams within your organization and have them nominate internally. That's important. We don't have an external nomination process. It's only an internal nomination process. So you have to go to your Microsoft team internally, and they can basically nominate you as a customer to engage the DM Jumpstart team, engineering team. Yeah, we do basically two pillars of work with our customers, although to be quite honest with you, we see this kind of meshing together more often than not. So we do run assessments, POCs, and pilots from an engineering perspective directly with our customers for these large-scale complex migrations. And then we generally move over, a lot of the time at least, into the right-hand bucket here of delivery support or production oversight. Yeah. And with that, I'll take a break. Are there any questions up to this point? Yes.
So if the company got nominated,
Mm-hmm.
so it's going to be free of charge?
It's free of charge, yes. Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions?
Good.
Thank you, Des.
Thanks, Jay.
All right. So we have a lot of tools which starts with D, or data for migrations. It's so confusing. We have DMA, DEA, DMS, DMAT. So let's look at one by one. So the first thing which I want to take you is this side. This is maintained by us, DMJ team. So this gives you a step-by-step document to do different steps of migration, pre-migrations, during migrations, post-migrations. So if we choose a source, it just gives you a step-by-step document, basically before you start what you do, then pre-migration, what are the steps, migration, and post-migration. So now you have all the tools here. Bye. So this is maintained by us, and we frequently update this with the latest tools available, the first-party tools, of course. And also this has even some of our partners who have done some of these migrations, as well as some of the case studies of complex migrations which have been done. From there, we move to looking at the tools. Before that, so we have, yeah, I'll come to that. So let's look at the tools right now, and then we start from there, right? So So if you look at the tools, we have a set of tools where we do homogeneous as well as heterogeneous migrations. So we have tools such as SSMA, which helps to do heterogeneous migration from different targets to Azure SQL Database or Azure SQL MI or SQL Server. We have tools like DMA and DEA and DMS, which is basically homogeneous tools, and we have also some of these hybrid versions available for heterogeneous workloads. In the left-hand side, you can see all the sources which we can migrate from, and the process of migration involves, as Des have mentioned, we have a discovery process, assessment process, then we have some pre-testing process, we do the migration, and then the post-migration process. For the discovery process, or to understand the current environment, some of the tools which we use is Map Toolkit. It goes down, look at all the SQL Server or Oracle or VMs in your environment and come up with a comprehensive list. Once you have those inventory, the next step is to do some assessment. So for that assessment, we have tools like DMA, which looks at the compatibility, feature parity, and the compatibility issues. And we have tools called DAMT, Data Access Migration Toolkit. It is an extension to Visual Studio Code, which basically go through your source code and helps to find out connection string. How many connection string do you have? How many changes do you need to make there? Or is there any statement, T-SQL statement inside the code which you need to change while doing this migration? So it will list it out. We can save it and upload it into DMA, which can give you a comprehensive list of things which you need to take care of. So let us go ahead and do one of those and see how it is. So Data Migration Assistant, this is the tool. Hope everyone can see this, right? All right. So this tool, we can do two things. One, we can do an assessment, and we can do a migration. This would be an offline migration where we do just restore it into the destination database. So if you are doing an assessment, for example, we are just doing a demo, and so the assessment type can be of two types. One is for database engine, and other is for integration services. So I'm doing for database engine. The source type, either from the on-premise SQL Server or AWS RDS for SQL Server. We want to get all the SQL to our cloud, right? So, and then we have the target here. It is Azure SQL Database Managed Instance on a VM or SQL Server. So I'm going to choose Azure SQL Database, and then we create. So it check all the database compatibility issues, all the feature parity issues, and then we move to the next level. So here I'm going to give my authentication. I'm using Windows. So these are the databases which I have. So I'm going to do a couple. So if we want to track any of the changes which is coming from the application, like is there any dynamic SQL which is coming in, or is there any type of statements which is coming in from the application, we could use extended events or trace to capture those, and then we can upload it here, which would basically integrate with this report and give you a complete list. So let's just avoid that and move forward and see this. So this is for each database. So if you have some applications, here is where you upload the output or the result from the data access toolkit. and see what exactly we find out. So let us go to Visual Studio Code, and so here, if you see, I can see data access migration toolkit, which is already installed. So this is an extension which can be downloaded and which can be installed here. Once this is installed, this is my code with .NET code, and if we look at this, we can see there is some T-SQL which is inside the code, which I want to check. Also, some of the data access method, the data source, and those connectivity things. So once we have this, we go ahead and we basically run data access. So if you look at data access, data access help is there, which can give you a complete list of all the different commands you can run. And also, if you then look at you have options to analyze a file and analyze a workspace. So we choose analyze a workspace. It gives either it is a SQL Server or an Oracle. It works for PL SQL, Java applications as well. So we choose SQL Server. So it is analyzing the source code to see what all changes which we have to make. So it will give out a report like this where it has scanned 13 files, and we have 4 action items where we have these kind of changes to be made. So if you look at each, it would show what changes where has to be made. Once you have this report, so if this is a big application with number of lines of codes, you can run through this and get this output. Basically, you can save it. I save it into as a JSON document, and this can be an input for your DMA. So I go back and I get that saved output, and I ask to start the assessment. So when I start the assessment, it comes up with the SQL. We have 2 options. We have SQL Server feature parity, as well as we can see the compatibility issue. So I think you can see it properly, right? So it gives you basically what are the features which is not supported, unsupported features, partially supported features, as well as features or any migration blockers or features which are not supported in this. Also, we could look at the compatibility issues. So if you see, it gives us the compatibility issues for cross-database queries, which is basically the query which is coming in from the application. So we get basically, so this is a migration blocker, because for having us to implement this, we may need to use a different method to do that. We can't take it straight away to the Azure SQL Database. So this is one of the tools which gives you a very detailed assessment report of what can go to which target and what cannot go, what are the different changes which you have to make, or how you can mitigate it. So once you get this, we can upload this into Azure Migrate. Hopefully this works, because the MFA was giving me some problem before. Okay. So Azure Migrate is a hub now. So Azure Migrate is a hub to upload or see all the assessment which we do. We do in infrastructure side, we do in database side, we do for application side, and then we could upload it into Azure Migrate and see a high-level view of all the migrations.
While Jay is starting that, just who here knows about the functionality of the data access migration tool? Has seen that before? Heard about that? It's a pretty new. I mean, February we came out with the Java version. We're currently previewing the .NET version for it. So it's only a few people. It's extremely important because that's what I was mentioning earlier. On one side in the DMA toolkit, we just look at the schema, right? So we can miss some stuff. Can miss any dynamic SQL, for instance. That's why we've added the possibility to ingest extended events into that so that you can gather over a business period of time any of the ad hoc queries that are coming into the SQL Server as well, because that's something you don't want to be hit by, right? Everything can be green and lovely. You do the migration, and then some code comes in that you weren't aware of, that isn't in a stored procedure, that we can't analyze as static code. So that's something that we've been investing time in ensuring that that can be analyzed as well. And the DAMT side is an extension of that as well, of course, from an application perspective. Thousands of lines of code, going through thousands of lines of code manually. It's not a really nice thing to do. So that's something we've been trying to, as well, kind of give you to help you out. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
Question?
So,
there's a question.
Yeah, it's a question. So the question is, it's from Oracle. You have a lot of application calls which is coming in. You want to see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
No, probably not.
Yeah. At this point of time, no, because this is stored in a different format. The other one is stored in a JSON format. This is stored in a little bit compressed serial format. So, but in future, we might have that capabilities developed to bring in those in. Yeah. For DAMT, you could just use it and get the basically the trace from the source code. So you don't have, it is basically going through the source code. But if you're taking from extended events, then it'll have to be from the production or with the similar things which is coming in the load. Yeah. Yeah, it's extended events. It's very lightweight, right? Yeah.
Sure. We have it very well documented exactly what you need to capture in order for it to be ingestible into the tool. And in actual fact, we can take this offline afterwards, but in actual fact, we have customers that are running the lightweight extended event sessions for analyzing this kind of ad hoc query data over very long periods of time in order to get a true business process perspective on what the actual applications are throwing at the database. So it's not unusual for us to have months worth of data from an extended events trace. For this analysis. It's pretty lightweight, and we've never experienced up to this point of it crashing a server or causing an issue. If you have examples of that, then I'm sure not only us, but the SQL team will be also very interested in that. So let's take it offline, probably.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the question. So last thing, we can save this assessment and we can start look it again later if you want to, so that we can go through it. So we have uploaded this into Azure Migrate. So if you look at Azure Migrate, Azure Migrate has the capability to assess Windows as well as Linux server, where we look at the infrastructure side, look at the SQL and other database side, and also the application. So this is a quite new feature which is coming in, where we do the app migration as well. So you can assess the app by giving a URL. It would do the initial assessment. Then you can download the tool to do actual assessment on the app. Tomorrow there is a session of this migration tools from the migration team. So they would probably go very deep into this application assessment tool as well. So back to Azure Migrate. If you look at this assessment, we have uploaded the assessed. Look at the assessment. So in one page, we can see all the assessment which we have done about all the databases. What are the migration blockers? Or how many breaking changes are there? Is it ready for Azure SQL DB, or is it ready for the SQL VM and the compatibility levels? This would give you a high-level view. For example, if you want to show executive presentation or to the executive team, this would be helpful. And if you want to go deep into what changes, then you should be probably going to the DMA to get deep analysis and the object details. So this was the first tool, which is DMA. And so one more thing which DMA does is it helps to analyze and make Skew recommendations. What should be the capacity which you're going to Azure? So if you look at the DMA when we install inside program files, we get a PowerShell script which basically says to look at the Skew recommendations, right? So Skew recommendation data collection script. So we use that script. So this is possible now only from the command line. So we basically use that script to run and get the recommendation. So this normally takes 40 minutes to run. So I will just show it, but then I'll stop. I have already run one, so I'll show the output from that.
The recommendation is to run it for 40 minutes. You can run it for longer. The minimum recommended time to execute is 40 minutes, so that we get a good understanding of what the resource utilization on the on-premises SQL Server is to make good estimations as to the size of the target.
Yeah. So it just starts with, it's just running this PowerShell script with the server name and the path where we need to collect the data, and then we basically would collect everything. So it will run for 40 minutes. That's for minimum. So we just stop this, and so I have already collected it here. So I'm going to use this, which I have already collected, to come up with the output. So similar to the same functionality, we use the same command, same command line to get, where we say, so this can be, the pricing can be based on live pricing, so it needs connectivity to the internet, or you can run it offline, which it takes the price which it has the last time. So let me run it here. So it's basically runs, and then we have some output here. So if I open this, it would give me the pricing tier for each database, what should be the compute level, what should be the max data size, what should be the estimate cost per month, all these details. A catch here, this doesn't take into account the IOs. So it's kind of an algorithm which basically looks at CPU and memory. So if the workload is much IO intensive, so we'll need to take care of that as well. So similarly, it also gives the pricing and the tiering for the MI as well. So everything can go to one general purpose tier, and then based upon different compute level.
Zoom in.
Oh, okay. What is that? No, the estimated cost is 6,366.
I think from the
Oh.
Azure SQL Database.
Okay, SQL Database, yeah. So the SQL Database pricing, yes. It is based upon DTU pricing. So, yeah, it needs to be added up. So other one is instance-based. You have all the databases in that instance. This is basically database-based, so it's different price. Any other questions on this? So this was the one tool which would give you the assessment as well as the Skew recommendation or help in capacity planning of this. So once we do this, then we have a next tool called Database Experimentation Assistant, which is a tool which is used for testing. Basically, it's an A/B comparison. You run a trace on one system and replay the trace on the target system. And then you see the difference between how the queries are running. First, it will make sure that whether all the queries can be run without any error, so that is there any issue with that? Or second, if we are comparing the performance of each queries, what would be the difference? So that tool is called Database Experimentation Assistant. I'm just going to delete and store it. So Database Experimentation Assistant. So it's basically, it asks or allows you to capture a trace. So basically you give all these details, you give a capture name, and then either you can capture as an extended event or a trace. We can specify the intervals where we want to capture and the location. And this is done for testing, so we need to make sure that we have taken a manual backup and restored it so that we can run the trace on the target platform as well. Similarly, we just need to give the SQL Server connections and about the local host. So if you look at this, I have I have already done some connection. So it's basically, it would be looking like this. So you just need to give names and the path and which database server we are connecting to, and and what are the username and password. Once that connection is done, it will run for the minimum is 5 minutes, which wouldn't be sufficient for many of the cases. So we will run it for a while to get a more meaningful output from that. So once that is done, we basically replay the trace in the target environment. So we have already restored the database to target environment and replaced the trace to the target environment. For the replaying also, it is the same. Only difference is why if we are using it into a MI or a Azure SQL database, we basically would want to redirect the trace to a storage account and give the SAS URL here so that it can connect to that storage account. So I have a similar capture which I did in the morning for this connectivity. So it basically shows this, and the only difference is I have given the storage account here to do the replay of the traces. And once that is done, the next step is an assessment. So we connect to the server, and then it gives you a report like this. Basically, you can deep dive into each, and then it gives what all query was run by in that time, and what is the difference between duration during target 1 and target 2 run, and whether this is more, this is less, and also is there any error which happened during this the queries while it was running to on the target environment. So basically, to make sure that before we do the migration and the cutover, we do all the testing with respect to performance, as well as we make sure that all the queries which comes from the application runs smoothly in the target environment as well. So now we have tools which helps to check the compatibility, which checks the application code. Now we checks the how the performance of the queries would be, and the next tool is basically one which helps to do the migration. So the next tool is called Database Migration Assistant. So, no, sorry. The next tool is called Database Migration Service. So let me just, so yeah, so it's just a service. So Azure Database Migration Services. It will help us to so this is one of the migration or one of the services I was started in my account. So basically, you just can install the database migration service. It is free. So there is 2 versions. One would be the normal one, which is 1 core, which is used for offline migration, and other one which uses the 4 core version, which is business critical one, which helps online migration as well. So the difference is for offline migration, you have a cutover, which is the period of restoring. And for online migration, you can migrate the whole database and the transactional logs and keep on migrating until you find out or until you have the exact cutover time when you want to cutover, and just do the last tail log restore and bring it up. So that the downtime is very minimal. It would be last log applying time, which would be, yeah.
How would it work for managed instance? Because we cannot restore the database in the storage mode.
Yes, the question is how would it work for managed instance? Through DMS, we can. So it internally does same thing, restoration and log applying. So we take it to a shared storage and then from that shared storage, it restores to the managed instance. So DMS internally manages the LSN number of the logs and then find out how the sequence are and does the restoration. Yeah, it is not possible directly, but yes, it is possible through DMS. Question? Do we use this tool to migrate to Kubernetes or Docker? To my knowledge, no. That would be a different migration. This is basically, we have fixed target. So if you look at the migration service, we have fixed target from like SQL on-prem to managed instance or Azure SQL Database. And we have hybrid DMS, which comes with the heterogeneous database to managed instance or Azure SQL Database.
Yeah, so to come maybe quickly to that point as well, I mean, here we're talking about the platform services. We mostly utilize the data migration service to migrate from a source system to a target of Azure SQL, so one of the platform services. If you were running SQL Server on Docker or within Kubernetes, then it's just like any other SQL Server. So you could basically utilize any of the current technologies that you would use on premises anyway to do upgrades. Like if you wanted to use replication for that purpose, you could. If you wanted to use log backups like log shipping, that would be another perfectly viable solution to make a migration.
I think we're at the top of the time, so.
Sorry, yeah.
Let's just push this. And so for migration, you could just start a new migration project, which is basically a new activity, and we have options like online, offline, and SSIS migration. And if it is online, you do this online migration and select source or target. So I have a quick video to show that. I know we were on top of the time, so. So here we just selecting the source, selecting the target. While selecting the target.
Make it big.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So while selecting the target, we basically would create something called the app ID so that to individually identify the resources which we are creating. And once it's not running. Yeah. So once we create that, then basically we would say what is our shared drive is, where the backups is coming. So the theory or the thinking behind this is we don't want to anyway disturb the existing backup policies of the customer, so we just take the backup from where they have storing it. So we are not taking any backup, different backup. We're just using the same backup where the customers are storing it and taking it to storage which we create and then restoring it. So the only thing which we have to look here in a little bit is the creation of this application ID and the key, which basically needs to understand each resources you create separately. And then we can select the databases which we want to migrate. And once that is there, here we are giving the shares where the backups are there. And one of the features which we have here is we can do parallelism up to 4. So we can have different databases migration happening at the same time. And finally, once we have configured everything, we could basically do the cutover, and the cutover is very seamless. You basically apply the last log and do the, there is a button to do the cutover, and you do the cutover, and it comes online. So this is one of, so using this, this has helped us to fast track many of this migration. So basically what happens during this migration assignments for us is, if this is a big data center type of migrations, we initially, when we do the assessment, we categorize these applications and databases into different buckets. We say that this is low-hanging fruits, which can be done very easily, and the next is a medium, which takes a little more time, and when we have the critical. So the criticality, medium criticality, all this is based upon different factors like business criticality, downtime, how complex is the database migration, what are the changes. So based on that, we map, and then we take away the low-hanging fruit first. And this also helps us to learn on the way, so that some of these unique things which we identify during this initial migrations can be helpful for the next. So one of those migrations, which we recently did, and here we have the architect who did that, Alex. So yeah, you can wave the hand. So this is a video from the customer. So let me play.
The journey.
We had problems with sound earlier, so we have to see.
The journey has been relatively straightforward to move to cloud.
That's very low.
The managed instance gives us all the flexibility of a traditional SQL environment, but less overheads in terms of management, patching. So our DBA resources would look to reduce, and we'd look to release them onto other projects, other work. It will reduce costs in terms of data storage, footprint. We spend in the region of about 180,000 a year on SQL licensing. That will reduce down to about 60, and that's every year. Some of the things have been 2,000% more efficient, and we've deployed our solution within 2 days. Historically, that would have taken 2 or 3 months. We're actually using quite a number of the technology factors within Azure Databricks as part of our processing environment, Azure Data Factory version 2, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, a SQL Managed Instance, and one of the big game changers is the use of Data Lake Gen 2. So actually how we store the data and use that data to process and load it. Now currently support about 56 different organizations, and that can go up and that can go down. And actually the Azure flexibility allows us to do that very, very simply. And actually we can have smaller step-up incremental costs for doing that, making the service cheaper to all our customers.
So that was the customer NHS, and if you want to speak a little more about the project.
I think the first person is down there, but anyway. No, I think in general, I think what you heard there is just something we wanted to round off the kind of discussion. We're almost out of time, and we wanted to leave some time for questions as well at the end. But in general, it's very important to understand, as they said in this, the NHS, NEL from the NHS in the UK, the health department in the UK, mentioned on this engagement, it was, it's not just, and we've talked about this right at the top of the session today, it's not just about the database. Moving the database is one aspect, but as they were mentioning, there's a lot of other outlying kind of connected components that you need to consider in this. There was a session before we came on here about reporting services. There's also SSIS, which we see very heavily being used in various solutions, which needs to be taken into account. I think we touched on it very, very quickly. We showed some of the improvements we've made in the tooling around assessing SSIS packages as well, because we do notice that that's a very important aspect of a migration. And it's also very important that we don't forget an extremely important part of this, which we haven't had a chance really to discuss today because of time, but Pedro Lopes, I think, is doing a session on it, or you can catch it up on past on the recordings, which is around post-migration tasks, because it doesn't just stop once you've migrated the database, of course, across into Azure SQL Database. We've touched on it in the aspect of the A/B testing through DEA, but in essence, we have other tooling there driven out of the SQL engineering group as well, like Query Tuning Advisor, various other aspects that can be utilized as well to look at that. Because again, compatibility certification, right? When you migrate your database and move this database initially up into the cloud, up into Azure, and have it running on Azure SQL Database, for example, using the tooling that we were talking about, the compatibility level will be maintained. So eventually, you're going to possibly want to move that compatibility level as well up to the latest version of SQL Server to take use of some of the functionality and features. We haven't had a real chance to talk about that today. We've been talking about it more as a how do I unblock complex migrations? Well, the way to do that is to keep it on the same compatibility level, because that's back to the compatibility certification. However, moving forward, you're inevitably going to want to move that compatibility up to the most recent level to gain some of the functionality and improvements in the engine. Once you do that, then that's where you do need to do additional testing, even post-migration. So that's where you're going to be starting to look at things much more detailed around query plan execution, around what are the changes with cardinality estimation is a big one, comparatively from coming from a very earlier version of SQL Server like Compat level 100, like SQL 2008, 2008 or 2. There's been, as you can imagine, in the intervening almost 12 years, quite a considerable amount done in the engine. That means that you're going to be having to have a look at stuff like that. So we unfortunately haven't had a chance to talk about that, but very importantly, datamigration.microsoft.com, that was pointed out by Jay, that's the place to go, because that has the post-migration steps, that has the detailed documentation, learnings, IP from our side as well, where it's a one central repository, basically, because as we all know in the room, and I too was a DBA for many, many years, it's a complex thing, a migration, and it's sometimes complex to know where do I go to start, where do I go to get the information, even when I think I'm through and I want to do those post-migration steps. What we've tried to do with datamigration.microsoft.com is give one central repository with both our internal IP artifacts that we've gathered over 2.5 years of the program, as well as these artifacts from other areas of Microsoft, and in one central location give you all of that. So you can just go there for whatever you want, for your homogeneous replication, I was going to say, migrations, and heterogeneous migrations as well. So one place for everything you need. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone. I know you had a lot of options today. Thanks for coming out, and enjoy the rest of the PASS conference.
Please evaluate the session.
Yep.
So
thanks for that as well, Jay.
thank you so much.